Hey everyone. Hey everyone, my name's TJ Booker and this is my new YouTube channel. So, the reason I'm creating this channel is because I'm a huge Dungeons and Dragons geek. I love me some D&D. Basically, I've been working on a much bigger campaign and I have had a lot of thoughts on it, and I've been sharing it with a lot of people, and a lot of them have been really interesting, and so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and do a campaign diaries on this new campaign. It's called Calamity and Keladia, and Keladia is obviously the setting, but I decided to go ahead and just make this whole YouTube channel just to talk about it, just talk about, I guess, D&D in general, and just see if anyone was interested in talking about D&D with me. I am not anyone particularly special or super knowledgeable about D&D. I have, basic knowledge like a lot of people out there do. There are a lot of you out there that have decades of experience with D&D, and that is not me. I have years, but not quite decades. So I wanted to make this channel just to talk, just to inform you guys, I guess, on what's going on with my campaign, on what's going on in Keladia, what's going on with my players, with their characters, because it is a very rich story that I'm trying to build with them. A very rich world, I guess I should say, would be the better way of putting it, because any good DM knows that it's not about a story that the DM crafts. It's the story that they build together in the world that the DM crafts. Yeah, Calamity and Keladia. It's my new campaign. I hope you guys like it. I guess to introduce you guys to the campaign background a little bit, it's going to be set in this world, like I said, I created called Keladia. And Keladia is a world where at the time when the game picks up, the campaign is kind of been broken up. The world has been broken up into a few different places. There's the realm of Keladia, which is probably the biggest area in this campaign setting. There's also Mogar, there's the Wilds, and there are the Western tribes. And they are all part of this greater realm called Dairn, but Keladia is where the primary bulk of the campaign takes place. So to give you a little bit of background about it, Keladia used to be a very diverse place, filled with all types of magic, not super civilized, more civilized than the rest of Dairn for sure, but didn't really have like huge kingdoms or anything like that. They were very accepting of a lot of people. It's a very peaceful place to live for the most part. Pretty simple life. Everything changed though about 50 years ago when this other race I introduced showed up. This race is called the Makote, and those of you who are Final Fantasy fans might know that the Makote are actually from Final Fantasy, but I gave them stats and such like that for their race to be in my campaign. And I think they're pretty cool. Some of you might think they're kind of weird, and they basically are just like elves or human in the way that they appear for the most part, except that instead of hair, they have like fur, and then they have like cat ears and cat tails. I just thought the race was cool, and so I wanted to introduce them into a world, and I made this world Keladia. But basically, there was no religion of any kind in Keladia at all until about 50 years ago, when the Makote showed up in these massive flying ships, these massive airships, powered with some sort of unknown energy. No one really knew how it worked, except that everyone was in awe of their amazing technology. Turns out the Makote serve and worship the Celestials, which in this campaign setting, they are like the gods of this campaign setting. But before they showed up, there was no such thing as clerics or paladins or anything like that. It didn't take long at all for the people of Keladia to begin to adopt the practices of the Makote, seeing as they were so far advanced in their technology, finding out that a lot of their technology straight up came from their worship of the Celestials. They found out that the whole reason the Makote had flying ships was because of their worship of the Celestials. All of their technology was from the worship of the Celestials, all of it. So they, the Keladians, took it upon themselves to begin worshiping the Celestials too, and with it they sort of introduced their own doctrines and their own philosophies on how it worked, and they begin like ostracizing and alienating other groups of people, like druids, were no longer okay. Warlocks, which were already kind of iffy to begin with, were no longer okay. And they began to push these different groups of people out to the outer areas of Darren and into the wilds, into the north where Mogar is. Mogar is where the orcs are. And into the tribes and stuff like the western tribes. Over the oncoming decades, the people began to develop civilization around the worship of the Celestials. So the campaign picks up about 50 years or so after this fact. So interestingly, here in Keladia there are 7 major cities. The biggest one is called Jarek. 10 years before the campaign begins, Jarek becomes the very first ascended city. The Celestials grant gifts to the people of Keladia based upon their worship. And they come in the form of these celestial stones, these golden, vibrant stones that could fit in the palm of your hand, but have the power to lift entire cities into the air. And the Makote were showing them how this worked, and over time they continued to worship, and the Celestials granted them this power, and Jarek became the first ascended city. And over the next decade, most of the other 7 cities also became ascended cities. And so here we are, 10 years later, and it is Ascension Day. It is the 10-year anniversary of the very first ascended city, Jarek, and that's where our campaign picks up. So with that, let me introduce you to our characters. So the interesting thing about the way I wanted to start this campaign is I didn't want to start it by everyone choosing classes or rolling stats or anything like that. I found it actually much more interesting if everyone would create commoner class characters. So I'm going to go through each of them, and there are only 4, but you're not going to hear me say anything about a class, because they're all commoners, which means their stats are pretty much 10s across the board, unless they choose to boost 1 up to 12 and bring 1 down to 8. That's about it. I'll post a link to the commoner class down below here, so just in case anyone wants to check it out. It's a homebrew class. I'm not even entirely sure who it's made by, but go ahead and give them some love and give them some credit, because it's actually a really interesting class. You go from 1 to 5 as a commoner. So my first player, his name is Jared, and Jared plays a quirky halfling named Tinpin Perowin. He's a bit of a trickster. He travels Keladia, trying to do minor magic tricks and such. A lot of his family are magical, but he wasn't quite picking up on it in the same way that they were, so he tried to develop his own ways of magic. It just wasn't quite working out for him. So that's Tinpin, played by my buddy Jared. Then there's Ryan's character, and Ryan plays a reluctant hill dwarf named Mullard, with a G. And I know what you're thinking, where does the G in Mullard come from? Well, when I asked him what his name was, he specifically said, my name is Mullard, with a G. The G is silent. M-O-L-L-A-R-D-G. So it's Mullard, and the G is silent. He plays a reluctant hill dwarf, like I said, and his character's really interesting. He lives with his mother, here in the city of Jarek, actually, and his mother runs a flower shop. The third player's name is Austin, and Austin plays a human, sort of like a con artist named Thomas. And Thomas has been around a little bit, but has had an interesting past leading him to this particular point, and I'm kind of curious to see how things go forward from here. And lastly, the last player in my campaign, his name is Nick, and Nick plays a Makote, actually. He plays one of the Makote that I created, and I gave him all the stats on how the Makote work and their racial features and all that kind of stuff. And his character's name is Victon. I'm gonna butcher this because he's never even said it in the campaign. Zenshinte? Or Zenshinte? I don't know, but we call him Vic, and that's just what he calls himself. So Nick plays Vic. Nick plays Vic. Yeah, that's right. Nick plays Vic. When we first started, we actually had another player in our group who was playing an Aarakocra, but decided after the first session that this just wasn't going to be for him. So we went ahead and proceeded without him. It was kind of a shame, though, because his backstory made it really interesting as to why he'd be here on Ascension Day in Jarek. Has to do with, like, his father was the governor, but, like, he was adopted, and Aarakocra were shunned because of their connections to druidic magic, which was prohibited here in Keladia now over the past 50 years. So we have our characters, Jared playing Tinpin Perowin, Ryan playing Mullard, Austin playing Thomas, and Nick playing Vic. So this particular video that I'm doing right now is actually going to cover the first 2 sessions that we had, which were like the first beginning part of the prologue. And the next video that I hope to do, if people like the campaign diaries, is going to be the next 3 sessions that are what happened after the beginning part of the prologue. And all of it is the prologue. It's 5 sessions altogether. And we just finished our our 5th session, I guess I should say, this past Friday, and we won't be meeting again for another month, so I can finish fleshing out this world. Give them some time to, ponder on what's been going on so far in the prologue, in the prelude, in the prologue, what's the best way to put that? Anyway, so Calamity and Keladia. The players are doing all sorts of random things across town. Mullard, he was like waking up in his mom's house, and his mother comes to the door, starts banging on the door, and was like, Mullard, can you please go get some radiant paper down by the stands in the markets? And Mullard was just like, Mom, like, do I have to? And it created an interesting tension, all the while the Aarakocra character that was there at the time, he was an interesting Aarakocra because he didn't actually have his full wings. They were cut when he was a child, and they slowly grew back over time, but like they were misshapen and much smaller, and so instead of being able to fly his full distance, he was only able to fly like maybe 10 feet at a time. He spent most of his day actually climbing the chains that hold Jarek down to Earth. Jarek is floating a few 100 feet in the air, but these massive chains the size of like buildings are what hold it down to the Earth so that it just doesn't float away, into the air. He's climbing that. He makes his way into the city and finds this marketplace on the lower end of town, and he's got like himself covered up in these cloaks and such because he's trying to keep himself a secret. He doesn't want anyone to know that he's an Aarakocra because obviously Aarakocra are kind of shunned. And so the first thing that happens that's pretty interesting is that both Mullard and this Aarakocra, whose name is Kiri, end up in the same place at the same time and accidentally run into each other. And now this dwarf is looking up into the face of this shrouded Aarakocra, and the dwarf, Mullard, is kind of stupefied. He's not entirely sure what to think about this. And being a relatively passive person, he just sort of was like, yeah, I'm just gonna kind of back up and pretend I didn't see anything. Like, I'm sorry, buddy, I'm just gonna go about my day. And Kiri was like, yeah, I'm just gonna be like, ugh. And they're both just kind of like, let's avoid this. When an interesting thing happened, they each felt a hand get placed on each of their shoulders. And when they turned to look to see who it was this older man who had this like frizzy gray long hair that was kind of poofing out to the sides. And he was like, oh, hello there, people. He kind of looks into Mullard's face, and he looks up into Kiri's face, the Aarakocra, and looks at them both and says, interesting. You come to Ascension Day? What brings you here today? And they're both just kind of like, who's this crazy guy? And what's he want? Let's just get out of here. Especially Kiri. He's like, I need to go find my dad. I'm going to get my revenge on him today, because that's why he was there. That's what he wanted to do. Today, he was here on Ascension Day to get the ultimate revenge on his father, the governor of Jarek. And so he's like, I need to get out of here. I need to avoid this guy. But this guy is kind of like grabbing onto his cloak, and he's like, okay, no quick movements, let me just get away. He's like, all right, man, I'm just trying to mind my own business. And the man kind of smirks and he winks at them. He grabs the back of the Aarakocra's hood and just in one fell swoop just yanks it back. And now the Aarakocra is exposed to the small world around him. He's in a small marketing corridor. There wouldn't be more than like 20 or 30 people packed into this small area. But the man sort of perks up and he's like, oh no, look, we have an Aarakocra in our midst. We have an Aarakocra. And he just starts like screaming, and everyone's turning and looking. He's causing a scene. He's doing it on purpose, and they're not sure why. Why is this guy doing that? And Mullard's just like, I don't know what to do here. And so he just sort of like backs up a little bit, and the man just kind of runs off like screaming and laughing. And they both notice that there are some guards about 40 feet away, just sort of staring at them. And one of the guard yells out, hey, you, and begins to run in their direction. And Mullard just kind of like whatever, you know, like, I'm just a guy standing here. And Kiri just takes off running. He's like, can I get onto the roof of a nearby building? And I was like, sure. I guess, like, make an athletics check to see if you can find something to climb. And he's like, I rolled, forget what he rolled. It was a good roll, though. And he was able to find some, like, barrels or crates or something to jump up on and get on top of the buildings and begin to run throughout the marketing quarter here in the lower district of Jarek. Meanwhile, Mollard is just like, okay, well, that was interesting. Let me just grab this radiant paper that my mother needed. And radiant paper is just this paper that has some sort of effect on it because of the celestial stone that is in the city, and it reflects its light. And his mother used it just, you know, to wrap up flowers and for bouquets and stuff, just something ornamental and really, really pretty. While you're here in Jarek, the paper on the flowers just shines and just, you know, illuminates the flowers that are within it. That's why he's here. So he's just kind of like, whatever. Mom sent me to get flowers, and that's what I'm going to do. He turns to leave and is met face to face with two guards who each put a hand on his shoulders, and he was like, what do you want? And the guards were like, you were standing here right with him. There was no one else nearly as close as you were. You're gonna have to come back to the guardhouse with us up near the 1st District and just answer some questions. And he was like, I just came to get some paper, guys. And he asked me, he said, can I get away from them? And I was like, you can try. And he was like, I guess I'll just go with him. And that's the last we see of Mollard for a while. And Vic is just manning this shop. He works at a jewelry shop in the 2nd District of Keladia. Sorry, in the 2nd District of Jarek. And there are 3 districts of Jarek. There's like the 1st District, the 2nd District, and the 3rd District, which is the lower district. The 3rd District is. So he's just sort of manning this jewelry shop, just minding his own business. And I was like, you're not doing really anything? He's like, no, I'm just kind of here, running the shop. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll come back to you. So, mind you, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just thought that the guards were just going to grab Kiri, but Kiri ran away. And that's what I love about D&D is I don't go into the sessions expecting anything in particular to happen. I just kind of have a story that's going to lay out, and they may get a little bit railroaded with these first couple sessions because it's the prologue and I want to, you know, show them the story that I have for them. Which, mind you, by the end of it, no one had any complaints. They were all just kind of like, wow, TJ has a story for us and we're going to go with it. So for the first little bit, there was just a little bit of railroading going on, but Kiri's running on rooftops, Mullard's going down to the guard's house, and Vic is monitoring the shop. So we transfer over to Thomas, and I'm like, Thomas, what's going on right now? And we describe this small scene, a lesser marketplace of sorts, a lot more crowded here in the 2nd District. There is this one particularly interesting stand in front of him that's not selling jewelry so much as it's just like baubles and some small gems and stuff like that. Out of nowhere, I describe Kiri falling from the sky and landing on the cart and on this little stand, and just kind of baubles and stuff go flying everywhere. But one in particular, this blue, about like the size of your fist stone, just kind of falls off and falls about 10 feet away, relatively close to him. He's like, I'm gonna swipe it. And I was like, you sure? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, all right, roll that sleight of hand check. And he rolled so bad. I think it was like a 4. Now, mind you, each of these characters, although they are commoners, they have in mind what class they are going to become. And if you go and take a look down below at how the commoner class works, it's basically you have a class in mind that you're going to become, and as you level up in the commoner, you become more like that class, but you're still not really great at anything. So I describe him reaching down and picking it up and someone yelling out, wait, no, thief. And he looks up and comes face to face with Kiri, and they just kind of look at each other for a second. And then someone else yells, wait, Arakakra. And the guards chase after Kiri again, and Kiri takes off again, jumping into another barrel and up onto a roof and starts running further, closer to the 1st District, because he is determined to get to his father. Now, Thomas is just like, oh, okay, I guess I've gotten out of this one scot-free. No, Thomas. No. The shopkeeper yells, isn't anyone going to do anything about this guy? He's stealing my stuff. Now, Jarek has a lot of guards, and not all of them are chasing Kiri. Some of them are still here just trying to keep the peace. A couple roll their eyes, and they start running after Thomas. And I'm like, Thomas, what are you going to do? He's like, I guess I'm going to run. Thomas asked, is there like an alleyway or anything I can dart through? I said, yeah, there's an alleyway a little bit ahead. It's a couple blocks down that you can see that you could probably make your way to before they could get to you. You're pretty fast. And he said, all right. So he starts running. I get back to Kiri. Kiri, what are you doing? He's like, I'm on these rooftops. I'm like, he's asking how high I'm up now. I'm like, you're getting like a few stories taller. See, in like the 3rd district, most buildings are like 1 to 2 stories tall. In the 2nd district, you're getting to more like 3, 4, 5. Now you're getting really close to the 1st district. And these buildings are getting quite tall, and to fall from one could be very bad. He said, how high up am I? I'm like, you may be a good like 6 or 7 stories up at this point. So we're talking 60 to 70 feet tall buildings. And he said, is there anywhere to get to? I said, yeah, there's a building that's a few stories taller than the one that you're standing on top of in front of you. And there's about a 15-foot gap separating you from that window. And he said, I'm gonna run and jump into that window. And I said, okay. Because at this point, like his robes have been yanked back. And when he took off running, he disrobed so that he can move quicker and use his wings to help like push him along and leap from building to building and stuff like that. And that's hard to do when they're enrobed. So he jumps, and I say make an acrobatics or athletics check, whichever one you think is going to be best for you. And he's like, I'm definitely going athletics for this one because I think he had in mind to be a paladin. So he jumps and he rolls really well, and I describe how he jumps and like flaps his wings a little bit, which help him to glide just that few extra feet further and land right in the window way. And he finds himself now in this very beautiful and ornate room that seems to belong to like this greater condominium area. You're in like an office or a bedroom. I forget what it was at the time. It was a couple months ago, I guess, at this point, that we were going through this campaign. And I asked him, what do you want to do? He said, I'm going to look out the window. Are there any guards out there? And I said, you see a couple guards kind of like scanning the streets. You can tell that they're probably looking for you, but they definitely seem to have lost you at this point. And he said, I'd like to make a perception check to see if there's anyone else in this building. And I said, well, in the building, I don't know, but you can make a perception check to see if you could figure out if there's anyone nearby or in any of the other rooms adjacent to this one. And so he does, and he rolls pretty well. And I say, it seems pretty quiet up here. Whoever owns this particular living space doesn't seem to be here right now. So I describe these different doors, and he finds a closet, he finds this really ornate robes, and that's when he kind of discerns I must be in the 1st district because these clothes are much nicer. And I said, what are you gonna do? He's like, I'm gonna take the robes, I'm gonna put them on, and I'm gonna try to hide myself because I still need to get to my father. I'm gonna have my revenge. And he never really clarifies what his revenge is. Is he gonna kill his father? Is he gonna expose his father as a father of an Aarakocra somehow? And he never really quite describes it, but I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to turn out. What none of the players know is that none of them are really going to get to any of these goals today, that they all have a fate and a destiny to get to, and I need them all to get to the guardhouse, or at least I need to get them all together somehow. I need to get them all together into a place where I can make the next events transpire. And I really didn't know how this was going to happen. I thought maybe this will take a lot longer, and there's certain events that I really wanted to happen in this particular session. And so that required a lot of narrative, me just kind of saying, this is how things are going, this is what you're doing, yada, yada, yada. And the players didn't seem to mind that at all. They just kind of went right along with it. And they were like, sure. And one of them even said, I think TJ's trying to get us to do something, so let's just do what TJ is asking us to do for the time being, because it seems like it's leading to something. And everyone was like, yeah, sure, let's just do it. Let's see where it's going. Kiri makes his way back out onto the street, covered in all these new ornate clothes. So I cut back to Thomas. Thomas, you get to the alley. What do? I just start running down the alley. You run down the alley, it makes a sharp right-hand turn toward the 1st district, but that's when you realize there's just a door there. And you've already run 40 feet down this alleyway just to find a door on the right-hand side. What are you going to do? He says, and I say, you see some guards appear at the opposite end of the alleyway, and they're kind of looking around, and he said, I run into the door, So you run into the door, you find an interesting thing. It's a shop, but for some reason down this alleyway, you're not entirely sure why it's down here, and you kind of look around, you see baubles, and you see gems, and you see jewelry, and you look up at the counter, and you see this Makote just sort of staring at you while polishing this stone, just sort of like, okay. And they just sort of stare at each other for a little bit. And I say, you hear the guards yelling in your direction. And he said, I'm going to go hide. And so he runs and he hides under the counter, and the guards come. And they start asking Vic all these questions. And Vic is like, yeah, there's nobody here. And I'm like, make a deception check. And he does, and he rolls really well. And I'm like, yeah, the guards don't seem to realize that Thomas is here right now. And Thomas is seeming like I'm trying to figure out, is Thomas gonna like swipe more jewels here? Because that's the kind of thing he would do. He's a thief and he's a con man. So the guards eventually leave and the door shuts, and before Thomas has an opportunity to stand up, the door opens once again, and I describe an older gentleman with long frizzy hair just kind of poofing out to the side, walking to the room, kind of dressed in these like gray, dark gray robes, and he's like, hello. And no one really knows what's going on with this guy at this point, but everyone's kind of like, oh gosh, it's this guy again. And of course, Vic and Thomas have not yet encountered this guy. So they just sort of play along, and they're like, who are you? And he's like, oh, it's not important who I am, it's important who you are. And long story short, after a brief description of him knowing exactly where Thomas was, pointing him out, he opens the door and screams, oh, guards, he's in here, the thief is in here. And he just sort of turns at them and winks, and then disappears into a puff of smoke and just like swirls away. And they were both just like, what the heck? And so I'm having a really enjoyable time playing this particular old man. So Vic tells Thomas, you need to get up, there's a door in the back, you can go out the back way, just get up, go away quick, because you're not going to get me in trouble, just leave before I have to say anything, just get out of here. And Thomas says, he gets up, he runs up, right before he can leave, he like comes face to face with the actual shop owner, and they just kind of look at each other for a second, she's like, who are you? And he just brushes right past her and runs up the back door, and the shop owner asks Vic, who's this guy? And Vic's like, don't you remember, we hired a new intern? And Vic's, and the shopkeeper's like, what? I don't remember. But it's too late. The guards are in the room, and they're just like, where did this guy go? And the shopkeeper's now very confused, and she's like, what is happening? And Vic's just like, no, there's no guy here. And she's like, there's definitely a guy here. He was just here. He ran out the back. And so the guards look at Vic, and they go, you're gonna have to come with us for questioning. And Vic's just like, do I have to though? Like, because like I'm Makote, and I guess he thought that like Makote were absolved or something of sins, and they're like, no, you're gonna have to come with us just for questioning, just for trying to figure out where this guy went to. So they take him, and another one goes out the back to try and find Thomas. Now, I'm actually not entirely sure what the details were that led to Thomas's capture, but it was very shortly after that he was captured. I think actually, oh, no, I actually remember exactly what it was. He made his way out into the 2nd District, and he's like, I just want to find a bar, I want to find a tavern, somewhere to lay low. And I said, yeah, you find the nearest one, you open the door, and unfortunately, there are some guards that are standing by the bar that are talking to the barkeep and describing a person that seems to match you very well. And he said, okay, I'm going to slowly back out of the door. And I say, okay, but as you do, your back hits something really solid. And you turn around and you see what appears to be a guard, but just much, much bigger, standing a good 7 to 8 feet tall. And he just kind of looks down like, you're the thief, aren't you? And he's like, no. And then, of course, just 2 hands on him. And then I think he knocks him out, just like fist to the head, knocks him out, brings him back to the guardhouse. So now we have 3 people going back to the guardhouse. I move back to Kiri, who is desperately trying to get to his father, to get his exacting revenge. I think he's going to try to kill him. I think that's what Kiri was trying to do. I think at this point, Kiri was like, you know what? My dad sent me away as a child because he was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of what I am. And I'm going to come back to kill him. And I was like, wow, okay. So you move into the 1st quarter. and you're making your way to the Celestial Tower, which holds the stone. And I describe how the only way to get there, though, is through the massive crowd that is arriving here in the courtyard to celebrate Ascension Day. That's what this whole day is about, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, just in this courtyard alone, amongst the hundreds of thousands of people that live here in Jarek. Yes, Jarek is a floating city that hosts hundreds of thousands of people that live within its borders. It's a very large city that floats in the sky, hundreds of feet, if not close to 1,000 feet above the earth. Above Darren? Above Darren. Earth? I'm not sure how to describe things like this. So anyway, he's moving through the crowd. And I'm like, okay, here's the thing though. You're moving through a crowd. I'm gonna need you to make a performance check to see if you can blend in. And then I want you to make a stealth check. And I'm not gonna lie, he made a really good stealth check. There were guards on the outer perimeter that of the crowd that were like kind of looking in, kind of looking at everybody, and none of the guards saw him. But that wasn't the problem, because he was having a really hard time just blending in his newly aristocratic attire to the rest of the crowd. The clothes didn't quite fit him right, and you know, you could tell based on his movement and how he presented himself that he just wasn't one of them. And that became problematic, because the more he got into this crowd of people, deeper and deeper and deeper into the hundreds, into the sea of people, the more people started to look and peer and kind of see up and started to take notice. And then eventually the crowd began to slowly back away from him. And at this point, he's just literally hundreds of feet from the tower when the guards all see him and just encroach from all directions, pointing down their spears at him once they reach him. And they arrest him and take him to the guard tower. So at this point, the characters hit level 2 in Commoner, which is very, very simple. It requires very, very little from them. I think they get like 1 or 2 things added to their character sheets. It took us a total of like 2 or 3 minutes to level them up. So they're all here in the guardhouse in different cells, just kind of waiting for whatever is coming. Whatever guard's gonna come and question them or banish them or sentence them or whatever the case may be. While they're all here though, one of the characters, I think it was Vic, hears a very distant cry, like a scream from very, very far away. And then like a rumble, as if like stones were falling. As they're all just kind of talking, and we're just role-playing at this point, just having conversation, just trying to figure out what's going on, why is everybody here? It's Ascension Day, everyone should be celebrating, and some of them aren't very talkative, because some of them obviously have more malevolent plans. But the sound begins to get louder, and louder, and louder, until it's so very present and around them. They can hear so many people screaming and crying for help, and rumbles and crumbles, and I even point out to one of them, it sounds as if like buildings around you are collapsing. Not all of them, but just like some, there's like, you can hear one falling to the ground, and they're like, what's going on out there? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're trying, like, can we make perception checks to figure out what's going on out there? I'm like, you can make any kind of check you want. In my games, you're always allowed to make a check. Whether the check does anything for you may or may not help. You don't have to ask me, can I make a perception check? Just make a perception check. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. They can't. And they start yelling at these 2 guards that are in the area with them. And these 2 guards start freaking out. They start talking amongst each other and yelling at the other prisoners to stay put and stay quiet. And one of them just sort of like clenches a spear real tight and says, I'm going to go check on what's going on. And he turns and he opens the door and just screams and immediately gets pulled out, and the door shuts. And the other guard just like, You can see this guy is terrified. He is so frightened of whatever is going on outside, but he cannot leave his post because he's not sure whether he's more afraid of what would happen if he left his post or if he just went outside, because something definitely happened to that other guard. And so I'm trying to build the tension here for these players. Like, something very serious, very, very serious, almost world-altering is happening outside, because Jarek is a giant floating city, so how could we be getting attacked by anything? Unless, like, the Makote are attacking or something, but then why wouldn't Vic know this? So, here my players are, when suddenly the wall by that guard collapses inward, and one of the giant stones breaks off and destroys part of the hinge, part of the gatework of one of the cells. And that player proceeds to get out and let the other players out, let the other characters out, because primarily that wall that caved in is blocking the only exit from the guardhouse, which creates an issue for them. How are we going to get out? So they start looking around, and eventually they make their way to the back and find what appears to be something similar to a sewer drain there. And they lift the cap off, and they all proceed down inside, and they find themselves in actually what would be the sewers of Jarek. Now, why there are sewers in the prison that, you know, are just conveniently placed is just me being a goofy DM, not knowing how to get them out of this guardhouse. I wasn't nearly as prepared going into the session as I would have liked to be, and also there's a lot of player choice here. I didn't want to take away their choices, I just kind of wanted to railroad them a little bit through this particular situation. And after fighting off a small swarm of rats, they make their way up a few blocks away. And when they come face to face with it, they are these infernal-like fiends that are like flying through the air, these dark shadowy creatures that are flying through the air, and some of them are like picking people off the ground, like launching into the air and then like just dropping them from, you know, dozens of feet up in the air, and some are like conjuring more from the ground, and they're coming up and they're killing people, and there's bodies everywhere, and it's terrifying, and the players are just like, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, well, I don't know, what are you gonna do? And that's when they came face to face with this really harsh reality, which is while they've picked up a few weapons and stuff like that, they are only proficient in daggers. They can only like really use a dagger all that well. I think one of them could also use like a mace or something, and I forget why. But they are really helpless. They don't have a real class. They're commoners. What are they gonna do? So they say, what's everyone else doing? And I say, everyone else seems to be running in one particular direction. And so they're like, I guess we start running in that direction. They start running, and they can hear some guards yelling, get to the docks, we're evacuating the city. And so the players begin making their way to the docks, and Mullard's like, what about my mom? And they're just like, we need to get to the docks, maybe she's at the docks. And he's like, I guess. So he goes to the docks. When they get there, they see the Makote there with their flying ships. Now, mind you, at this point, the Keladians also have flying ships. They're just not nearly as nice. The Keladians' flying ships look like actual ships that have been converted to fly. And they use the same power that makes the city float. It's these celestial stones, except instead of like a full stone, these ships use like just like little shards. That's a thing that I implemented. Little tiny pieces of stone, very, very, very tiny. Like one stone you could get hundreds of shards off of, and these shards could make ships fly. Whereas the Makote ships don't even look like ships. They're just like these flying like fortresses, and they're much more smooth and beautiful in nature. They don't look like ships. They look like pods and other things of the sort. And everyone begins boarding the ships, and they get there, and they're probably amongst like the first half of the wave of people that are there, because they can see a few dozen ships flying off in the distance, and each ship can probably hold a couple hundred people. And so they can tell there's a few thousand people that have already left. They're flying away toward the east currently, toward the coast. They're flying towards, it would seem like, the city of Nondalir, which is a coastal city which is not yet ascended, but is one of the 7 major cities of Keladia. And so the players, they, in a panic, just keep pushing through the crowd and trying to get onto a ship. The Makote ship, there aren't very many of them. There are only a few, and they're trying to get people away. Some of them begin to fly up from beneath the city and open up these big chambers beneath them. And for the first time, Keladians are seeing these much smaller, like, fighter ships fly out of the bottom of these things, like these little snub fighters. They start flying out and attacking these swarming, flying, dark beings. This golden radiant energy is just flying out of them, just like bullets, like these laser bullets flying out of these ships, and they're just cutting through all these dark beings. And while they're doing really good work of the dark beings, there are so many more of these dark things than there are Keladian ships. Makote ships. There are literally thousands of these beings, whereas there's maybe just like a couple dozen of these little snub fighters. And so the players are just kind of like, their player characters, I should say, are in awe of just like what's going on. They're just trying to get out of here. They get onto a ship and they start flying away, and they get a couple miles away, and there are a few ships behind them when they hear this huge explosion far past the city behind them. Jarek is the biggest city here in Keladia, and it's surrounded almost entirely by this mountain range. Like if Jarek is right here, then there's this mountain range that climbs around it to like here, but leaving this entire area open, and that way is east. And that's where all the ships are going. But like back in this direction, they just hear this massive explosion, and they kind of like look over the side of the ship, and they see that one of the mountains has entirely exploded outward like a volcano, and climbing out of it is this massive flaming infernal creature that just climbs it, and it's just like, what is going on? It's like a Balrog from Lord of the Rings, except way bigger, like hundreds of feet tall, and just starts climbing out of it and just like, and just makes a full-on sprint toward the city. The distance between the mountain range and the city is like a good 30 to 40 miles. And this thing is just like, and just starts booking it. And this thing is closing a mile every couple seconds. The players are just like, what is happening? And this thing gets to the city, jumps up, launches into the air, and just swipes at the Celestial Tower. And the players see the tower knocked off of its base, and they see the light from inside where the stone has always shone from flicker and then go out. And the whole city kind of lurches up for a moment and then plummets down to the ground. Hundreds of feet, hundreds of thousands of people in the city plummets to the ground, and just, when you can't even see the remains of it because just dust immediately flies into the air miles high and begins billowing towards them. Just dust and debris and particles and molten rock from the mountain are now flying in their direction, and they can see ships getting hit by the debris and getting consumed by the smoke and by the dust. And that's when in front of them they see the Makote ships begin to fly out in front of the Keladian ships, and this yellow beam appears for a moment, shoots out in front of the Keladian ships, and these rifts appear, seemingly summoned by the Makote ships, and all the ships enter these rifts that are remaining, and that's where we ended our first session. It was, the players were just kind of like, holy crap, like what's going on? What's going to happen next? And I was like, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens until next time. And so that's going to be all that I share with you guys for now. Like I said, we're taking a month off, and so I'm going to hopefully post all of the campaign diaries of the last 5 sessions. Hopefully it's only going to be about 2 or 3 videos that really tell the story of what happens during this prologue time. But for now, that's Calamity of Keladia. So a lot more interesting things to come. Stay tuned. Be sure to like this video, subscribe. I want to hear what your thoughts are so far on the campaign, what's going on, what it's leading to. So if you wouldn't mind just posting down in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, any questions or anything like that, or if you just want to talk about it. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. And I don't know, I'm hoping for really good things with this campaign. I'm putting a lot of hard work and soul and energy into this thing, and the players seem to be really, really loving it so far. So, like I said, share, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like I should have a catchphrase. Stay critical. I don't know. Have a good night, guys.